as we read Scripture, we come across stories. People with weaknesses, people with brokenness, people with issues. Common people like us. But in the hands of an uncommon God, they're used in unbelievable and powerful ways, in ways that we can learn and apply. Their obedience, and even in their times of disobedience, that help us learn and grow within our own lives. But in their imperfection still, they decided they wanted to be used in God's plan and His purpose, and not just their own desires. Now, so far, through this series, we have looked at some pretty incredible stories. We've looked at Noah, Abraham, Jonah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Moses, David, Daniel, and last week, Joseph. And in this final week, I want to take a look at a young woman who had to make an unbelievably critical choice in her life. A choice that had massive implications, not only for herself, but for a whole nation of people. This morning, we're going to look at the life of Esther, who reminds us of a very important truth. That when you are uncertain about your purpose, God does have a place for you. We've looked at all of these people, and we've seen everything that's occurred with them, the good decisions and bad decisions, but how they were still used by God. And yet, even when we're uncertain or questioning it, God does still have a purpose. Now, if we look at biblical history, we wonder where Esther kind of fits into this. Well, we know from Daniel that God had allowed Israel to have an earthly king, but that didn't work out so well. David was a great one. Many of the other ones that followed didn't follow God, so God allowed what to happen? From Daniel, we see exile. Exile. He allowed His people to be defeated by their enemies and be scattered into cities and foreign lands. And this is where Esther's story begins to intersect. It begins to intersect with God's bigger story, and it even intersects with our story. And I say that it does with our story because our brothers and sisters of the faith that have gone before us, they're all part of our story. They're the spiritual heritage that we hold on to. They're part of the spiritual family tree that we belong to. Now, Esther is written kind of like a modern-day novel. It's very driven by its characters. There's also this blend of suspense and intrigue and betrayal and conspiracy theories and treachery. You got to read this book. It's awesome. I promise you, if you sit down to read it, it won't even take you an hour to read. It's a very quick read. And Esther had a crazy life. You find out she had a crazy life. Her parents died when she was young, and she was adopted by her older cousin. Sometimes translations say her uncle, Mordecai. And if that wasn't enough difficulty to overcome, she lived in a time in history where the once proud people of Israel were now scattered among several nations because of their disobedience to God. And now she's one that's living in Persia. And Persia at this time is the superpower nation. And honestly, her part of culture is not well accepted amongst the Persians. I mean, talk about having doubts about your purpose and your place. I think Esther had reason to maybe feel that way. But her life is proof that even when you think you're uncertain about the purpose, God has a plan. God has a purpose. Now, in the beginning of the book, we read about the Persian king, King Xerxes. He throws this gigantic party, which apparently he did a lot of. And he wants his queen to come. And at that time, that was Queen Vashti. And so he sends for her, says, I want you to come. I want you to be a part of this. And she refuses. Well, that's a problem. In chapter 1, verses 10 and 12, it says, on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, and at this the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. I mean, I can understand that. He gave a direct order to his queen, and she went, on you. So the king decides what's to be done in this. He goes to his advisors. She refused my command, guys. What am I supposed to do about this? And they tell him, you know what? If the queen's refusing you, we're going to fear that that kind of mentality is going to spread. It's going to trickle down into the people. I mean, if the queen can disrespect the command of her husband and disrespect the command of the king, maybe they can too. Yo, king, I think you should make a decree. You need to make a decree about this. And they tell him what that's supposed to be. In 19 and 20, they say, if it please the king, let the royal order go out from him. And let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before the king. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. Now there's a lot packed into those couple verses, but I want you to look at one very specific thing that stands out that really pleased the king. And notice the part about giving the role of the queen to another who is better. See, this goes out, and his advisors decide they're going to make this even more legitimate. They gave him the idea, he agreed, he made the decree. All right, now let's pursue this further. It says, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the citadel, under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch who's in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. Well, this pleased the king, and he did so. Basically speaking, the king is now having the most gigantic beauty contest in the history of the world. This is like the superstardom of beauty contests. This is Miss America, Miss Universe, everything all wrapped into one. And the young women from all across the nation, they were brought to the capital to receive these beauty treatments for a year, and then each of them presented before the king. Well, Esther is one of these women. And when she's presented before the king, he has a totally different response from the others. Verse 17 of chapter 2 says, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Well, that's quite a big step. That's quite a big step that Esther's taken. The hard part is this is where the conspiracy part of the story begins. See, Esther's cousin Mordecai, he was constantly hanging out at the king's gate outside the royal palace. Most of that was because he wanted to get updates on how Esther was doing. He was constantly checking on her. He wanted to make sure that she was doing okay. But one day, while he was out there doing that, he overhears two of the king's guards plotting an assassination attempt for the king. Now, Mordecai, being a good citizen, he passes this information on to the powers that be, that the king may know what is up. And believe it or not, it's discovered that the plot was true. And so these two officers, in horrible fashion, are impaled on poles in the public square to send a very clear message that anyone who might consider going against the king in the future probably should think twice. And then Mordecai's name is added to the book of record that is all about King Xerxes' reign. So they record this into the history book. Now, here enters our villain, a wonderful man named Haman. Have you ever wondered about that name? Haman. I don't know, there's something about that just seems to roll off the tongue in an evil way. I don't know why, but there's just something about this name that just doesn't sit right. Maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe it's the villainous role he plays. See, he was actually of the highest positions of authority under the king in his government, but he was also the epitome of an arrogant, power-hungry schmuck. That might be descriptive liberty taken by me in my description, but that's how I view the guy. Everywhere Haman went, the people were ordered to bow before him. And most people did. Save one. Good old Mordecai. Mordecai refused to bow. Why? He wasn't the king. I'm not bowing to the guy who's not the king. Well, this infuriated Haman. The thought that even one person would not respect his authority in that way drove him nuts. So he finds out more about Mordecai, discovers that he's Jewish. Ooh, this does not bode well, because the Jewish people are considered less valuable to the Persians. So Haman hatches a plan. I'm going to kill Mordecai. Not only that, I'm going to wipe out all of his people. I'm going to kill all the Jews in the process. Same plan, different day. Here we go again. He goes before the king because he's going to warn him about this group of people and the danger that they pose. Chapter 3, starting in verse 8. Then Haman said to the king, "There's a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people. They don't keep the king's laws. So that is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, and they may put it into the king's treasuries." Guy's a schmuck. So the king took his signet ring from the hand and gave it to Haman. Then the king's scribes were summoned, and an edict was written to the king's satraps, to the governors all over the provinces. It was sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. Basically, the king just signed into law a purge. But it only mattered to one group of people. Now, naturally, Mordecai logs onto his Facebook account the next day and he sees this going on. And he's greatly troubled. So he decides to get on Instagram. He posts a reel about it with his thoughts on the matter to get it out there. Again, I may be taking liberties with the text. You'll have to forgive me. But he was devastated by the news. And so he sends a message to Esther and he pleads with her, "Please go to the king to do something about this." And Esther pulls out her phone and sees the text. And she issues a response to him in chapter 4, verse 11. "All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there's but one law: to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come to the king these 30 days. Her first reaction to the situation is probably normal. Fear. If she goes before the king and she hasn't been summoned, the law says he has the right to put her to death. He either holds out the golden scepter and says, "Yeah, you're okay, come in." Or he doesn't, and they haul her off and kill her. I can understand that fear would set in. It's one thing to believe in something. It's another thing entirely to risk everything for it. And she knew that just the king having a bad day when she showed up could result in the bad thing happening. So Esther was learning in this process. She was learning, and we learn this too, that truly finding your place and purpose requires great faith and trust. It does. It requires great faith and trust. Because Esther may have been chosen by the king for her beauty, but see, God had so much more in mind for her in putting her into the role as queen. And she had to learn that her faith in God was actually at work at that point in time. In the midst of the fear and the doubt that she had to trust that God was going to do what only He could do in her position. God had a place. He had a purpose for her life. And she should choose to step into it, to embrace it wholeheartedly. And the first reaction of fear and doubt, somebody had to speak truth in a critical way to her. And so she sent her message back to Mordecai, revealing that fear and doubt. So what did Mordecai do? He reinforced the truth. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. And then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews." You know, just because you're in there and you're the queen doesn't mean that you're void of this decree. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Might be the most famous verse from the book right there. Yes, it's scary. Yes, I understand your fear. But you got to remember the big picture. God's chosen you. He's given you that place of major influence. And it's very possible that He's given it to you at this place in time for this very circumstance. An opportunity to be used to change the world, to do what He wants you to do, to make a choice that can literally save a nation. And just so you know, if you don't step up to the plate, if you don't take courage and trust in this, somebody else is going to do it. And you're going to miss out on being a part of God's bigger story. Somebody else will step up instead. You'll be left wondering, well, what if I had done it? Mordecai is simply reminding Esther that finding your place and purpose requires great faith and trust, and it requires great courage. It does. Courage is something that must be within each and every one of us. How many times throughout Scripture do we see God tell people to take courage, or be brave, or be strong, or don't worry, or stand in the faith? We know throughout our lives that fear and uncertainty and ambiguity are going to show up. It's a natural thing in our human lives, but it's during those times that we make choices, either to give into or to overcome that fear. Let this sink in for a minute. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you do in spite of it. Let it sink in again. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you do in spite of it. I mean, think about it. How many of us have ever done a trust fall? Anybody in here ever done a trust fall? You got the 2 people or the 4 people or whatever standing back there. You got to turn around, you put your hands across your chest, you fall backwards, and you pray to God that they actually like you. Or how about this? Anybody ever have those moments right as the plane is taking off in flight and it just feels like the bottom of the plane drops out as you lift up off of the ground, and you just kind of have that moment of, okay, we're good. It's what it sometimes feels like when we're trusting God to show up. It can feel like the bottom's dropping out. It can feel like we're falling, not knowing if something's going to catch us. And I think Esther kind of had that moment of resolve where she had clarity, knowing that God had a bigger purpose for her in that situation. Though the bottom seemed like it was dropping out, she felt the lift and she knew, okay, we're going to be okay. She didn't know for sure how it exactly was going to play out, but she knew that she needed to be obedient and step out in that faith and know that one way or another, God was doing exactly what He was meant to do. He was doing the right thing on her behalf in her obedience and in her courage. Esther replies to Mordecai. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa. Hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So after getting prayed up, Esther goes to the king. And immediately it's off with her head. No. He extends the scepter and he gives her permission to approach. So Esther invites the king to come to a banquet. She said, "I'm going to put this together, and I would like you and Haman to join us." And the king accepts the invitation, and he sends word to Haman about this special banquet that he's going to get to attend with the king and the queen. And Haman, being that humble guy that he is, spends the next couple days boasting to friends and family how he has been invited personally to a banquet by the king in which he alone gets to attend with the king and the queen. "Hey guys, I'm going to a banquet. It's just me and the royals." But his friends in conversation with him rekindle the fact that he's still mad at Mordecai. So they give him an idea. They plant a seed. "Hey man, you should build a giant high gallows outside your house to hang him on. And you should go to the king and get his permission to do this So then when you go to the banquet, you'll really be relaxing and having a good time. Well, Haman, of course he likes this idea. So he builds that high gallows, and then he heads to the king to get his permission to hang Mordecai on it. What he doesn't realize is the night before, the king's had a really bad night's sleep. Restless as all get out. Could not close his eyes and relax. So he got up, and he was wandering the palace, and he called for the history books to be brought to him that he may read back many of the wonderful things that have happened as he's been king. And while reading, what does he happen to come across? The account of Mordecai, alerting them to the assassination plot that saved his life. And he realizes as he reads that nothing was done to honor Mordecai for that rescue. And all of a sudden, here comes Haman. He is walking on air. He is in the happiest, most joyful place he could possibly be. And he thinks that he and the king are total BFFs at this point. He's not thinking anything it could go wrong at this point. Scripture says, so Haman came in, and the king said to him, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? And again, being the humble guy that he is, said to himself, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? And Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you've mentioned. Oh, this is such a great brick wall moment for Haman. I love it. Dude was walking on air until he slammed face first into that brick wall. You can imagine his surprise when the king says, go and do exactly that for Mordecai. That name comes out of his mouth, and Haman's like, you can just see him, yes, 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 no! You gotta be kidding me. The anger that could have risen in him, the embarrassment. Because, well, who was a higher noble official than Haman? And that's who's supposed to lead the horse, right? So now he's leading Mordecai in this way through the city, saying, this is what is done to him whom the king delights to honor. Things couldn't get worse in his mind. Or could they? Sure they could. Sure they could. Not only does he have to honor Mordecai, he knows there's no hanging today, and next up, banquet with the king and queen. And the king asks Esther's request at this banquet. King, there's somebody trying to kill me and my people. The king is furious at this. He insists on knowing who it is. So what's Esther do? Is that man in the courtroom today? Yes, he's sitting right there. She points right at him, says, that's him. The king is so overwhelmed in rage, he gets up and he has to leave the inner palace room where the banquet's at. He walks out into the courtyard, and at this point, Haman knows, I am totally dead where I'm sitting. This is not good. I'm in serious trouble and desperate. He pleads for his life at Esther's feet, and he grabs a hold of her. Wrong timing, dude. And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house? And more than that, one of the eunuchs goes, hey, I heard about this gallows he's built out at his house. And so the king orders that Haman be hanged on his own gallows. Done. An edict was then followed up and issued by the king, allowing the Jews to defend themselves from their potential attackers. Mordecai was actually given Haman's position of honor in the king's court. Esther had stepped up and stepped out when it mattered most, and as a result, she was part of God's delivering work of his people. This woman, who as a girl started out as an orphan, exiled in a foreign land, unsure of what her purpose and the meaning of her life would be. But I think she came to understand that when you're uncertain about that purpose, God has a place for you. God is going to put you in the right place and at the right time to accomplish His plan. But you got to be focused enough on Him to see the opportunities that exist around you. It doesn't do a whole lot of good to simply spend your life saying, yeah, I'm a Christian. Yeah, I believe in God. It doesn't do any good to try and fulfill a purpose without spending time seeking where that purpose comes from. You got to be courageous when your name is called too. You got to be willing to step up to the plate. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who doesn't want to know what their purpose in life is. But the reality is that we'll never fulfill that purpose if we don't first have that relationship with Jesus. If we aren't spending time in His Word, if we haven't accepted Him as our Savior. Step one is to surrender. A heart willingly given to God without question. Salvation that comes alone from Him. Two things. You repent and you believe. That's where it starts. Step two, a discipleship process. You got to have a good, solid church family where you're going to find encouragement, where you're going to find teaching, where you're going to find accountability in that growth. Maybe you already have the relationship with Jesus. Maybe you're already in that good church family. You know that He has a purpose for your life. But the reality is, you're not stepping up to the plate. You're not making the impact that He created you to make. Maybe it's because you've been too scared of what others will think, or maybe how they'll respond if you step out of that comfort zone. You might be too focused on the opinion of what man thinks. You're too focused on not offending people, instead of being focused on what God says in His Word and what you are supposed to do and who you are supposed to be. And maybe being content to let others just do that instead. I'm just going to stay out of it because that keeps me safe. I think maybe, once again, you need to hear these challenging words that Mordecai gave to Esther. Maybe, just maybe, you have been put in this position you're in for just a time like this. Step 3, obedience to God and His Word and His voice as He challenges you to step into your purpose. God knows what He's doing. He realizes that each of us has a unique role and that we have the ability to step up, and we need to step up, to trust and have faith in God, and to hold on to courage as He wants us to, so that we can make a difference. We could change the world around us, and we could change the lives of people who come in and out of our life every single day. Are you going to have the trust and the faith that Esther had? Stepping into the possibilities and the opportunities that God presents to you. The courage that Esther had to do the right thing even when it means risking so much. It might seem overwhelming and scary at times. But will you also choose to have the joy that Esther had, knowing that you've stepped into and joined God in His redemptive story of turning hearts toward Him and giving them the hope of eternity with a God that's crazy in love with them? God will put the opportunities in front of you. You just have to choose to step into them, obedient to what He's called us to do, overcoming any and every obstacle that might be in the way to honor Him and what He wants us to do. Are you really willing to truly be used?